Сайн байцгаана уу хүн төлөгчтэй. Өнөөдөр манай de facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Бостоны Дүрслэх Урлагийн Музейн төлөөлөн удирдах зөвлөлийн гишүүн доктор хадагтай Lisbeth Tarlow оролцож байна. Good evening.
Good evening. Nice to
Welcome
see
to
you.
Mongolia.
Thank you very much.
We are very interested to know more about your museum. Please tell us when it was established and what it's doing and what kind of exponents you have.
Sure. The Museum of Fine Arts in Boston is one of the great encyclopedic museums in the world, really. We are 146 years old, coming up to our 150th in 4 years. And we were established really by philanthropy, by people who gave their collections and wanted to establish a museum in Boston. We have exceptional collections, particularly in the area of Asian, Japanese art. We know that we have the greatest collection of Japanese art outside of Japan.
Wow.
We have a wonderful collection of ancient art, Nubian art, art of the Americas. We are now developing our contemporary art. About 2010, we completed a major campaign which resulted in a brand new wing for the Art of the Americas, which is a terrific way of organizing American art. And we also, several years later, completed a wing for contemporary art.
Looks like it is comparable to Guggenheim in New York. Or
we actually like to think of ourselves a little more comparable to the Metropolitan.
Okay, to Metropolitan. This sort of collection, just maintenance, and nothing to say about the mission. It's a lot of importance, and it should be it's a lot of work. Please tell us about the size. How many people are coming? How many total exponents? How many turnover, volume-wise, business-wise?
Well, in terms of our operating budget, which I think you're getting to, we actually spend $100 million a year to operate the museum. We have a combination of several thousand paid staff members. We have several thousand volunteers, which is extraordinary. Our volunteer membership is huge. We have a board of trustees, which has the fiduciary responsibility for the museum. And we have recently, I think you know, actually had a search, an international search, and we have a new director. The operating finances come from a number of sources. The first and foremost is about 35% comes from our endowment. And we have approximately $600 million in endowment. And then the next source of revenue, about 30%, comes from sort of engagement of our attendees, whether it's through ticket sales or our restaurants, our retail. But a huge amount does come from philanthropy, and 15% of it comes directly from annual giving.
Wow.
And 10% from membership, and we have 70,000 members, and we have over 1 million people attending in the course of a year.
Wow. And see, that's really very large numbers you said, particularly about the endowment. Endowment mostly people are giving it, right, to
for the most part,
to the museum. And why would people give so much to the museum?
It's a great question. You know, the cultivation of donors happens in a number of ways. People, for the most part, give because they have a passion. They have a passion for art. They have a passion and a loyalty to this museum. There are a number of people in the community who have become successful in a variety of ways, either through corporate involvement or governance, or even people in the, especially in the finance and real estate fields. And when people make a lot of money, they have a responsibility to give back. And as a matter of fact, it's a bit of an attitude: if you don't give back, you're really looked down upon. Philanthropy is a very strong tradition in the United States.
Yeah, this is the feature of developed nations, of course, leading nations. And I have been living in the US, and then I saw that approach of ordinary people with how much respect they approach to museums, fine arts. And this is a certain level of, in a way, maturity of the society, I believe. You are trustee of the board. Board of trustees. What is their function? Is it paid job, and how you get involved?
Trustees are volunteers, and we represent the governance of the museum. Museum goes on and on. The trustees turn over. They are, we have a two-pronged governance approach. We have a board of trustees who have the fiduciary responsibility for the assets of the museum, and we have a board of overseers who don't have a fiduciary responsibility but are supporters in many ways. Our responsibilities in terms of philanthropy are significant. There's an expectation of a certain giving level, and we exercise our responsibility by acting as trustees who have a couple of responsibilities, major responsibilities. First and foremost, we appoint the director. We serve as we through committee structures. We're very engaged in the operations of the museum, not specifically doing the operations, but working with the staff to ensure that the priorities are fulfilled.
How many members, trustees?
There are approximately 40 elected trustees.
40 elected.
And
You are one of them.
Yes, and then there are 50 horehonorary trustees who have already completed their terms.
And how long, how often do you meet?
We just reduced our number of meetings from 8 to 6 meetings a year.
So every 2 months or so?
Every 2 months or so.
Oh, so. And you have a particular division of labor who are responsible for a particular function?
I myself am chair of the board. I have a partner in this as a president, and it is a co-leadership. The only difference is that the chair chairs the meetings of the board.
I asked this question because I think we're going through this restructuring to have more, in Mongolia, have more functional board, the museum to be placed, attracting people, everybody from all across the sectors. Now question is, what brought you? I mean, first of all, you used to work for Harvard. You were in charge of Russia and Eurasia study there, and you also now chair of initiative on women's international leadership, Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. So many academic and interesting work you do have, and yet you go out to be a member there twice, once a 2 months you get together. I mean, what brought you there? Why you are working there?
Well, I should back up by saying that my personal involvement in the museum is probably on a daily basis, and even though the board of trustees meets, not every month, but on a regular basis, the committees is really where the work is done, and where we take advantage of the expertise of our trustees.
Why you have such a commitment?
I love the museum. I love art. And it is one of the great institutions in the city and actually even in the country. So you're right, I had a professional career in Russian studies. I still am involved in different ways. I got into the field actually through Russian literature, which I fell in love with, and then went on to study social sciences and did a doctorate in international relations. And Russian foreign policy has been of particular interest to me. I've always, even though, I happen to be of Jewish origin, and you may or may not know that most Jews in Western Europe and the United States come from Europe and come from the Pale of Settlement. But it really didn't have anything to do with my interest in Russia. I was particularly interested in the culture and in the history, and then in contemporary foreign policy. And then Russian-Japanese relations became a specific interest for me.
That's very interesting. Before we go to Japan, I just have a question on Russia. Your family, Tarlow, is to do with Russia, or?
Tarlovskis were from Grodno, Belarus.
Belarus. And your parents probably, or grandparents, came to U.S., or how did it work?
Well, my grandparents were actually born in the United States. It was my great-grandparents who came from, some from Belarus, some from Lithuania, and one element came from Latvia.
So knowing Russian, speaking Russian, and learning, studying about Jewish life in Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, you are aware of what's happening in Russia, what was communism like. I was there during communist time, studied in Moscow, and I kind of also understand Russians and Jewish also relations, how much strong intellectual power it has, Jewish have in Russia and had in Russia. And I think in a way it was kind of ousted people. Then many of them left as soon as the Soviet Union collapsed. And since that, today you are familiar with what's happening in Russia. How do you see say, democracy in Russia today?
I would say Russia is not committed to a real democracy right now. And Putin is quite authoritarian, as we know. He enjoys a lot of popularity as a very strong leader, and as we all both know, Russians resonate with strong leaders. He has identified a priority that people are embracing, which is make Russia strong again. They were quite humiliated in the after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Putin himself would say that the collapse was the worst thing that ever happened to the country, the loss of territory, the loss of the Union. And he is, I would say Russia is going on a path right now that is still quite authoritarian. As we know, there are a lot of restrictions on freedom, freedom of the press, freedom of association. It's been quite an anti-Western approach, anti-US in many ways. But at the same time, there's not been a lot of pushback on the ground level. I think the challenge will be what happens economically as prices of oil continue to abate, and Russia can't rely on the support that it's been able to give for pensions, et cetera.
You know, I always think in myself, and I want to ask you that question, is Russians are quite intellectual people. I know brilliant professors of the world rank, you know, truly intellectuals. How come the whole country are staying with that limited right of the freedom of expressions? How it can stay that long?
You know the intellectuals, but the intellectuals are a small percentage of the population, and it's a vast territory, as we know. For the most part, people are not that politically oriented, and it's
why is that so?
Why is that so? I think they live to survive. It's a tough country to live in, and it's a tough country to govern, and democracy has been messy, and people will say it wasn't introduced well at the end of communism, and it went too far too fast, and it resulted in a lot of inequities. We know a small percentage of people got enormously wealthy, and it didn't benefit the general population. So the West's orientation to help promote democracy, however well-meaning it was not well implemented.
What is that meaning of democracy that truly makes people wanting it all around the world? Why is that so?
Because you have a voice, you have command over your destiny, a sense of it.
Yourself individually.
And your self-respect.
And collectively too, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think we all would like to see a stronger push for democracy, but it really is contained in a narrower category of people. And Putin brought a lot of, he improved our standard of living for a lot of people, and got a lot, and was able to win a lot of success for that and support.
That's good for Russia.
Which was good for Russia, because after the collapse, even, as I said, a number of people got very wealthy, but people lost pensions, they lost health care, they lost a standard of living. Whatever it was in the communist days, it became worse for the majority of people.
let's go a bit now to Japan. Why Japan? No, what brought you to Japan study?
That's interesting. Well, actually, it was through my studies at the Fletcher School. I got involved in doing some research and work on the North Pacific, and was particularly interested in Japan because I was looking at foreign policy under Gorbachev, and the one area of foreign policy that was not solved under his period of leadership was over the territorial issue, which, as we both know, remains the sticking block in relation. So I was looking at the intersection between domestic and foreign policy to understand why that one issue never got solved.
And now, quite recently, in fact, last week, Mr. Lavrov was in Mongolia on the way to Japan. And in Japan, they are reopening an issue of peace agreement, which is not there in between these two countries since the World War II. And I think they will, it was said that also it has to do with that, the 4 islands. How do you see the short-term future of that 4 islands?
I'm very skeptical that anything will really happen. They've been talking about it for a long time. I don't believe that Putin will want to give back any territory as long as he's the leader. It's been a political issue, I know, but they've managed to compartmentalize. I'm skeptical.
All right. Now back to Mongolia. You first visit, right, to Mongolia?
Yes, it is.
And you see former socialist countries, satellite to bigger socialist system, now trying to survive through all this economic change. We have gone through the most hard time of transition. Now we get the second one where the mining boom and bust happened. How do you find the country? You have obviously traveled many nations. How do you see that Mongolia is dealing with?
I've been here for 2 days, so far from being an expert, but I've been asking a lot of questions and really trying to wrap my head around what is happening here. I am struck by the openness of the people. It seems to be very thoughtful people in a desire to become more developed and part of the West, perhaps, at the same time holding on to traditions. It's a difficult time for Mongolia. You're on a route of a boom economy, and right now, because of international forces, what's happening in China, et cetera, you're at a hiatus. So I think that the hope is in the younger people, from what I understand. Younger people are poised, they're hardworking, they're open to making Mongolia a higher functioning democratic society. I understand that it's going to take time. People say it will take at least another generation to get where you hope to be going, but I'm really struck by the eagerness that people are. We met with the American ambassador to Mongolia yesterday, and she is excited to see Mongolia being a leader among other emerging democratic countries, showing them how Mongolia has done this. You started doing it right away after the collapse of communism. So there's, like many countries, I think you grapple with corruption and other forces that make it difficult, but there's a will to overcome, and with good leadership, it will happen. I'm sure it will happen. You have a strategic location here. You're important to Russia. You're important to China. China's important to you. And back to that whole governance issue, even in terms of museums, it's a thoughtful people. You feel like they care. I could see that model of giving back can happen here as well.
What is that ingredients that make people feel they should give back to society through the arts, in particular supporting museums? How can we do it better so that people feel more giving?
You have to give them a sense of engagement and empowerment, I believe. That they have to feel vested and understand and agree with the vision, with the values, and with the goals. one of the problems, for instance, in the British system, where there's a tremendous amount of government support, you have less board and trustee engagement. And it makes it more difficult when government funding is reduced and you actually have to rely more on your trustees. If trustees are involved, both in terms of the financial well-being and the mission, they care about seeing it succeed. And you're taking people who are civically engaged, people who have accomplished things within the community, begin to see how art is important to the lives of the community. It's a civic engagement both ways. It's if they're eager to see a development of civil society, this is one of the best ways. Art heals, art changes lives, and they care to make it work for other people.
And also policy-wise, I understand there is a system in the United States that if you give to the art, to the community, it's also tax exemption.
Yes, it is. Thank you for reminding me.
How does it work?
Yes, there is, when you give to a nonprofit organization in the United States, it is deducted from your taxable income. So in this sense, the government is subsidizing that giving, and it certainly is an incentive. I understand.
Subsidizing is in a very smart way, not first collecting, then channeling through to that subject. Instead, you are just linking the two source and the recipients.
Exactly.
That's how, I mean,
it's an incentive to give directly.
This is possible probably only in a country where you have proper tax system, property taxes, everybody is supposed to pay tax and they know they can control, they can enforce it. In many developing countries, it is not going to work. I mean, not at that level. I think that's the lagging between this developed and developing countries, isn't it?
It is. You have to have a very strong system of governance, of government, of your legal systems. That is true. That has to begin there. Now, Japan itself, by the way, is going to be making some changes in its tax structure so that there will be an incentive. So it's taken time even in Japan.
Don't they have the same system of incentives?
Not the same, no.
Ah, is it? Then no wonder why they don't have such a vibrant museums and arts that you have in the U.S. You also mentioned about the role of government and the role of private sector through trustees on developing art. It is not only a matter of running the museum, it's also a matter of fact that the people, students, young people understand from early years of education the importance, how to get this connection working.
Well, one of the things we do is engage young people through education, and school children come free and they come with their classes and they become familiar with the museum. We have a very strong education department. Actually, there's been cutting back of funding for the arts in the schools.
Education department is our equivalent of Minister of Education.
Actually, this is different. This is within the museum.
Within the museum, and you have separate education department.
A separate education department within the museum.
That encourages school children visiting, probably going through certain classes in the museum, right?
Yes, it is across the levels. We have docents who are trained specifically to take school groups through.
From all around the U.S., any states, right?
You know, it really is from Massachusetts for the most part, but because most students wouldn't be coming in groups to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. They have their own museums.
But in case if they come, they also have certain discounts, something?
Absolutely. And
encouraging all citizens. Okay.
Yes, we have programs for all ages. We even have summer programs for young people. And we engage people in I think we're actually replacing some of the government funding support of the arts in the schools because it's been such a dramatic cutback.
And you have also a very sound budget as well to support.
Budgets are never sound enough. Okay. We're always doing a capital campaign. We're in the middle of one right now. and but we are committed to doing it. Education is a huge part of our mission.
What brought you to the art? Why? What makes a difference in your life, and from when it started?
Actually, it's a little bit in my blood from, I say that a little bit facetiously, but my family was very involved in the arts. My father helped start a museum in the town where I grew up. I have aunts who are artists and an uncle who taught at our own museum school. I've always been exposed to art and loved it. I knew when I was going to step down from my professional position at Harvard that I wanted to go get more involved in the museum, and it's been an absolute treat for me. It's exciting because it touches you on a personal level, it touches you on a spiritual level, and and it's aesthetically gorgeous. So, and it brings people together. It serves a really important function, I believe, civically.
Tell us about your family.
Well, my family came, as I said, my roots are from Eastern Europe. My father is from a town that was a major shoe town in the United States. As a matter of fact, it provided the soles for the army boots in World War II.
What's the name?
It was called, the town is called Brockton. It's
Brockton.
Unfortunately it's a town that's really lost its funding, and it struggles now, very high crime rate. But in those days it was a good, solid small town with a very diverse ethnic community.
In Massachusetts.
In Massachusetts, and you know, those were the days when manufacturing was very strong.
Oh yeah, okay.
Shoe business was strong, and so that was my father was, but he was also enormously civically oriented. I actually think he would have, if my mother allowed him, he would have been the mayor of Brockton. Okay. And both my parents gave us a good. They were role models in giving back to the community. And my grandparents as well. My grandfather helped start the hospital, a youth organization within the city. So art and philanthropy were very much a part of my life.
You have been studying and made your master in Harvard. You have been teaching there. How is it like working in Harvard? What is it? Why that university is very famous, and people have a big tag, I think, level. And what was your feeling working with Harvard? Now if you look it back and tell what was making special?
You know, I did graduate work there, you're correct, I did my master's there. I have worked in a number of areas at Harvard. Harvard is an exciting community to be in because the people are extraordinary. You have expertise in every possible area, and there's a commitment to excellence.
Commitment to excellence, and they do it. That's why they keep that level, at that level all the time.
Now, Harvard has a magical connotation. I know it has its flaws, so let's not overstate it. But it's like any place.
Like any system, it has certain. But
it's a wonderful,
by the way, it is like my feeling is like about the U.S. as a country. U.S. also has flaws as a system, but what I noticed that it has such intrinsic capacity to discuss anything openly, and they find the way to correct it. That's I like the most. Yes,
back to freedom of speech and the importance of debate.
Correct. Everybody has that right. Lisbeth, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
So nice meeting you.
It's lovely to meet you.
Knowing about the museum system, and I wish you good luck, and I hope one day you will have some connections with the museums of Mongolia.
I hope so too. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you. За хүн төлөгчтэй өнөөдөр манай de facto нэвтрүүлгийн зочноор Tufts их сургуулийн профессор Lisbeth Tarlow оролцлоо. Их баярлалаа.